Can I just firstly thank the committee for the report, which builds on, I think, a whole series of reports that it contributes to our learning and understanding of what's happening with climate change and flooding. In fact, builds on some of the work and some of the conclusions we had from the Storm Dennis and the recommendations that we made in this report in the local Pontypridd constituency at that particular time. Can I also say that at this moment, with the weather warnings that we have, our thoughts obviously go out to those people who are live in those areas where there has been flooding, because the impact, the concerns people have, the stress and the pressures that it creates on whole families as to will they be impacted again, and the points made about the mental health were ones I think we recognised at the time of Storm Dennis, but obviously are ones that actually continue on. I have a constituency, of course, that's flooded in many areas. When I first was selected to stand for the constituency Pontypridd, Elan was the area that regularly flooded. And I remember then the local councillor, who's now the deputy leader of Rhondda Cynon Taf, Maureen Webber, being up to her waist in water with a child in her hand, carrying that through. And it was my predecessor, Jane Davidson, who, with the help of European money, was able to develop the area, which has now more or less resolved most of the flooding problems in in the area of Elan above Rydfelyn. And it is no longer the issue that every year now, whenever it rains, there are concerns. Of course, there are things that have to be done to make sure culverts are clear and so on. February 2020, of course, we had Storm Dennis, and 1,800 homes in my constituency were impacted. 321 of them were flooded in various parts of the constituency, from Pontypridd, Trehavard, Nangarrow, Treforest and Trachlon. And we learnt a lot from that particular experience about the flood defences, the warnings failure, the lack of floodgates, the issues around drainage. And, it has to be said, of course, a lot of money has now since been invested, about £100 million in Rhondda Cynon Taf. The lessons that we learned from that period is also an understanding of how the flooding was coming about because of the concentrated rainfall in certain areas, particularly in our areas where we have the valleys. But it also helped us to understand some of the mythology that was also emerging, that maybe it was due to Brecon releasing water that flooded down, or whether it was Cardiff Bay Barrage holding back water, all of which I think have effectively now been disproved, and we have an understanding now as to the impact, because with climate change, we're going to have more of these very adverse events, which were meant to be one in 100 years, but clearly are now every several years. Storms Bert and Dara showed us in November 2024 that a lot of the work that had been done was successful, the clearing of culverts, some of the new defences, some of the reconstruction, and some of the work that is still ongoing. But of course, areas like Zion Street, Egypt Street, Pontypridd Centre was still impacted. And it's no consolation to an area that's been flooded to say, well, lots of other areas were actually really quite successful. And we have to address those, particularly streets like Zion Street. Egypt Street, I can say I was at a meeting only last week with the residents there, with NRW and with Rhondda Cynon Taf. I'm very pleased that some of the lessons learnt there now, we now understand why that had been consistently flooding. And it's partly because it is actually water from the highways going into the drainage system, but not being able to egress into the river because the river was rising, and of course the conflict of pressures. Really pleased that Rhondda Cynon Taf is now authorising the funding of a mini pumping station there, which hopefully I think will resolve that. Can I say that of the issues that still remain, I think that really emerged from the report and that we need to focus on are two particular things. Obviously, the issue with regard to forecasting, but one, there are still big issues with regard to insurance. The insurance in respect of businesses and the insurance in respect of homes, and recognising the issue also of landlords, because many homes have quite a transient population, and the obligations of the landlords and tenants coming in who don't know the history of areas is something that we really need to address. But I just thank the committee for that report. And obviously this is something that we are going to have to continue to pay considerable attention to in coming years.